Okay, so our portion today is Shemini, and I wanted to take a look at two things from the portion. We'll see how much time this takes up to see if we'll look at anything else from the portion. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So I want to look, I know we've looked at this section before, but I think we're going to look at it in a little bit different way today. And that is, if we turn to page 632 in the Eitz Chaim, which is the very last line on the page, the start of chapter 10 of Leviticus, whatever edition of Chumash you have, chapter 10 of Leviticus, it's near the start of the third Aliyah. So I want to read this theologically challenging section about the death of Nadav and Avihu. Like I said, we've talked about it before, but I think there might be two different takes that I want to do with it. So the very bottom of 632, Vayikhu v'nei Aharon, Nadav v'Avihu, ish mach tato. Before I continue, just the context here. This is the eighth day. The portion is called Shemini. Shemini means eighth. So there was a 7-day consecration ceremony. This is what happens. This is what's happening on the eighth day. Sacrifices are being offered, and now a description. Vayikhu v'nei Aharon, Nadav v'Avihu, ish mach tato, vayitnu vahen eish, Vayasimu aleha ketoret, vayakrivu lifnei Adonai eish zara ale asher lo tziva otam. So the sons of Aaron, that is Nadav and Avihu, because there are two other sons, Eleazar and Itamar. So the sons of Aaron, Nadav and Avihu, took each of them their fire pan, and they put fire in it, and they put on the fire incense. All right, so that's part of the ceremony every day in the Mishkan and every day in the temple. You'd have incense being waved, kind of, if you can picture Orthodox churches, especially, where people, the priest or other officiant, would have like this silver ball that smoke is coming out of it. And they kind of shake this and they walk around at least the altar with it, if not around the church with it. So that's kind of reminiscent of what this is describing. So it's not quite a ball, but it's a fire pan with fire in it. So burning embers are in it. And incense is on top of the embers, so that means the incense is smoking, so it's supposed to have a pleasant smell. And they offered, Vayakrivu lifnei Adonai, they offered before God strange or foreign fire that God did not command them to do. So they were being spontaneous with the ritual. They were doing something that God had not commanded them to do. So in other words, it's often in synagogues today that rabbi, cantor could be spontaneous in a prayer that might be offered, in a tune that might be used for the service. So there's that kind of spontaneity that might make the service a little bit different from one Shabbat to the next. Okay, so it's the structure is still the same, but there's a little bit different, something to add to make it special just for that day. Perhaps that's what Nadav and Avihu were doing, but certainly from the perspective of the narrator of the Torah, it was foreign, strange fire that they were offering that God had not commanded them to do. Okay, so putting a judgment on it, God had not commanded them to do this. So Clearly, for the narrator, that's a negative. And not seeing it as a, wow, look at the spirituality of Nadav and Avihu, that the spirit of the moment, first time bringing the sacrifice, first time doing the service, might have inspired them to do something else. No, for the Torah, they're doing something that God hadn't commanded them to do. Vatetzei eish milifnei Adonai, vatochal otam, vayamutu lifnei Adonai. Fire came out from before God, and it consumed them. That is, the fire consumed them. Vayamut, and they died before God. Okay, so I want to stop there for this part that I want to look at. So below the line on page 633, there's extensive commentary on this, trying to explain what they did wrong and how over the generations, different commentators have tried to explain what they did wrong. Were they drunk? Were they saying, hey, it's time for us young ones to take over the ritual from our uncle and our father? A whole variety of reasons being offered. None of them really satisfactory, and most of them all made up. Because perhaps the drunk theory is proposed because the next law that is presented here after this whole section is when the Kohanim do their work, they are not supposed to be intoxicated. So if that's the next law that's offered after this story, that's the initial connection that the rabbis make to explain why they should have been punished with execution just for bringing fiery incense that they weren't commanded to do. So I'm going to suggest the following, and I think that I had alluded to this when we talked about the portion Mishpatim. And I think, and I don't see that in the commentaries anybody had made a connection to this, but if we keep our fingers here, let's turn back in our Chumash to page 478, or whatever edition of Chumash you're using. You want to turn to Exodus 24, beginning with verse 9. Exodus 24, verse 9, 478 in the Eitz Chaim. So, the context here, chapter 20 is Moses, God speaking the Ten Commandments at Mount Sinai, the entire community being involved in that experience. Then a description of Moses being up on Mount Sinai as this is happening, receiving the tablets of the Ten Commandments, but also here in the portion Mishpatim, the giving of the civil laws to the people, kind of fleshing out the Ten Commandments into laws that how society is supposed to conduct itself ethically, and then a description of how Moses and some of the elders go up Mount Sinai and offer a sacrifice there. So that's where we pick up verse 9. Moses, Vaya'al Moshe v'Aharon, Nadav v'Avihu v'shivim mizignei Yisrael. Moses and Aaron, Nadav and Avihu, and 70 elders of Israel went up. That is, went up Mount Sinai. Vayir'u et Elohei Yisrael. And they saw the God of Israel. V'tachat raglav, and under the God of Israel's feet, Kima'asei livnat hasapir, like a sapphire pavement, uke'etzem hashamayim latahur, like the very sky of purity. Ve'el, okay, and so the entire people of Israel heard God's voice at Mount Sinai. That was an awesome and spiritual experience for the entire people. Now, on top of that, 70 elders of Israel, plus Moses and Aaron, two of Aaron's sons, Nadav and Avihu, not only heard God's voice, which should have been transformative and unbelievable spiritually, but they also see the likeness of God on this very glorified throne. But they saw the God and at God's feet. So I'm just assuming God's sitting, but it doesn't say here that God is sitting on a throne. But at God's feet, there's a pavement of sapphire and a pure sky. Okay, so imagine going to a Caribbean beach and seeing the water and the bluest of the blue that you've never seen before. So I would imagine that bluest of the blue, which would be pretty awesome to see water so clear like that, that this is even 10 times more incredible than that. And so it's clearly an awesome experience that should have and I keep referring to, I refer to this often, like the movie The Ten Commandments was just on TV again last Saturday night. And you know, when Charlton Heston comes down Mount Sinai with the Ten Commandments, he looks different than he had for the entire rest of the movie. So his hair is done differently, the color of his hair is different, and there's just an aura about him that is intentional for that experience. Okay, so what I bring that up only as an example of what I'm trying to get across with this experience that Nadav and Avihu had at Mount Sinai and how it might have made them different, and that would have might have prompted them to say, wow, I can't believe that we were allowed to have this religious theological experience. And perhaps now, coming back to Leviticus chapter 10, perhaps that's what prompted them to say, we're allowed to be spontaneous, we think, because we had the spiritual experience on Mount Sinai just a little while ago, just a couple months ago. Maybe now we're allowed to go above and beyond what is the commanded ritual, and that we're now allowed to, let's bring this incense as gratitude to God for being part of this, for being a part of this experience. So that's what I'm suggesting that could have prompted Nadav and Avihu, for all good religious intention, why they brought this strange fire. But the Torah here is saying, no, God, that then teaches us something else. We're allowed, we need, no, not that we're allowed, we need to temper our spiritual experience that we have and not think that we can create something new, that we can go beyond the parameters of ritual, but we still have to abide by the rules of the ritual. So even though Nadav and Avihu could have been elevated in a sacred, holy way because of their Mount Sinai experience, perhaps the Torah is teaching us that that they still, that at least from the Torah's perspective, that maintaining uniformity of ritual is better than people just going off on their own and being spiritual on their own. And so, though that might not be a satisfactory kind of lesson from here, it could be something to learn from this. And then now, the Torah goes on. So on verse 3 on page 633, and I want to talk about this statement for a little bit. Vayomer Moshe el Aharon, hu asher diber Adonai lemor, bikrovai ekadesh, ve'al penei chol ha'am ekaved, vayidom Aharon. So this is a profound statement. Moses said to Aaron, so it's his two sons who were just spectacularly consumed by fire and died. Moses says to Aaron, this is what God was talking about when God said, I will become sanctified with those who come close to me. Right? Or the English translates it this way, through those near to me, I show myself holy. Okay? I'm just saying, literally, the way I translate it is, I become holy through those who are close to me, or those who come close to me. Not who are close, but come close. So, that, in other words, you could understand this from the context. The Kohanim and the work they do make me, God is saying, holy. So that God is already holy. The Kohanim make God even holier. Like they supplement God's holiness through the work that the Kohanim do. That could be one way to understand it. Or from this context, Nadav and Avihu, the fact that they attempted to get close to me, parenthetically, in a way that they weren't commanded to do, that I, God, has become sanctified through them coming close to me. That their death, by me killing them with fire, I have now sanctified myself. So Nadav and Avihu, that God struck them dead because they came close in a way that they weren't supposed to, then that shows that God is becoming more sanctified. Okay, it's the Hebrew is problematic. The fact of what the verbs are referring to is problematic. And then just the thought itself, how could the death of Nadav and Avihu sanctify God? Right? God, right now, martyrs in Hebrew are called kiddoshim. So the same word. Anyone who's killed for the sake of God's name. And we have martyrs throughout history, throughout Jewish history. You have the Machzor talks about, has prayers from the time of the Crusades in the early Middle Ages. The Crusaders, they were killed because they were Jewish. The 6 million in the Holocaust were killed because they were Jewish. Those are martyrs. Okay, they weren't randomly killed. They're killed for their religion. And when you're killed for your religion, then you become a martyr. So they're kiddoshim. Okay, so God is sanctified through the martyrdom of these two. But then the second half is, so bikrovai akadesh, I will become holy through those who come close to me, and I will be glorified, ekaved, I will become glorified in front of the people. So, or before all the people. So, those who come close to me allow God to become sanctified. Those who come close to God allow God to become sanctified and become glorified before all the people. Okay? Vayidom Aharon, and Aaron was silent, which is an interesting response to this religious statement. So the death of Nadav and Avihu becomes a sacred, a sanctifying experience, which is problematic because, first, God teaches us, and the Torah teaches us, that that human sacrifice is prohibited. We're told not to follow the ways of the Egyptians, not to follow the ways of the Canaanites. Don't follow their idolatrous practices. Among their idolatrous practices was human sacrifice, if not specifically child sacrifice. We're told, like the story of God stopping Abraham's hand at the last minute from stabbing and slaughtering his son Isaac, is in some ways a statement about how Judaism is opposed to child sacrifice. And we have stories later in the Bible of how kings of Israel, especially King Manasseh, who not only brought idol worship into the temple in Jerusalem, but he also allowed and encouraged child sacrifice to happen in the valley that is right on the eastern side of the Temple Mount today. So if you were to kind of look above in a drone above the Temple Mount, the eastern side as it goes to Mount of Olives. So in between Mount of Olives and the Temple Mount is Gei Hinnom, the Valley of Hinnom, which is where the child sacrifices took place, and becomes then the term for hell. So the Hebrew term for hell is Gehinnom, the Valley of Hinnom, because of where child sacrifice occurred. So not only is Judaism against child sacrifice, child sacrifice is seen as the opposite of ideal existence. If heaven is the ideal and hell is the opposite of the ideal, and the opposite of the ideal is named for a child sacrifice, it's clear then how much opposed Judaism is to sacrifice. Right? It turns us upside down. If our goal in life is to bring heaven down to earth, then child sacrifice is the opposite of that. That would bring hell onto earth. Okay, so if that's the case, then how do we understand Bikrovai ekadesh ve'al panei kol ha'am ekaved, that the death of Nadav and Avihu, that God's killing of Nadav and Avihu is a sanctifying and glorifying event? This is the difficult thing to understand. So there's a little bit about this below the line here on 633, the right hand side, the last two lines. Through those near to me, I show myself holy. Hirsch, Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch, middle of the 19th century, pictures God as saying, the more a person stands out from among the people as a teacher and leader, the less will I show indulgence when that person does wrong. Prominence leads not to privilege, but to responsibility. The more responsibility one has in the community, the less room for error there is, and the more of a lesson they have to be in teaching the people what not to do. Right? So this is the same thing, why Moses was not allowed to enter the land of Israel for what seems to be the minor infraction of hitting a rock instead of talking to it. Right? So because he's the leader of the people, even something as minor as that, of hitting a rock instead of talking to it, prompts such a major punishment. So, and this is all that our commentary says about this. I mean, it just leaves us challenged by this statement. So I have in front of me, there's this English translation of the traditional medieval commentators, and Deborah's familiar with this from our Torah class for 26, 20, 30 years, 29 years, whatever it was. We were studying the Torah verse by verse with the traditional medieval commentators, and then the Jewish Publication Society, while we were working on Genesis, came out with Exodus and then the rest of the volumes called the Commentator's Bible, the JPS Mikraot Gedolot. So Mikraot Gedolot is the name for the traditional text of the Torah with the accompanying Aramaic translation, and the traditional medieval commentators, mainly Rashi and Ibn Ezra and Nachmanides. Those are the three big ones that are in there. And then there's also Sforno, and then there are super commentaries to Rashi that are in there. It depends what edition that you have of Mikraot Gedolot. So the English translation, they try to offer some way to understand this, but it's still all about the expectations that Nadav and Avihu should have known better. Rashi says about this that that Moses was saying to Aaron at this point. In other words, not just this one sentence that this is how God becomes sanctified, but Rashi pictures and the rabbis picture that there's more of a conversation going on. That Moses said to Aaron, "Aaron, my brother, I knew in advance that the tabernacle would be consecrated by the death of those with whom God was most intimate. I presumed it would be me or you. Now I see that they were greater than you or I." In other words, Moses had a vision that based on this idea that the verse said at the start of verse 3, Moses said to Aaron, "This is what God had said." So when did God say? We don't have this verse, "Be krovai kadesh." Through those near to me, I show myself holy. God never said that before. We don't have that in the Torah before. What is Moses referring to when he says to Aaron, this is what God's talking about when God said this? So the Rashi and the other commentators have to try to figure out where that verse is, and they say it's someplace in Exodus, but it's not the exact wording here, so you have to play with it a little bit. Anyway, so Moses says to Aaron, "Aaron, my brother, I knew in advance that the tabernacle would be consecrated by the death of those with whom God was most intimate. I presumed it would be me or you." So in other words, Moses thought that as the sacrifices were, the 7-day consecration ceremony would be complete with Moses or Aaron dying in the course of offering a sacrifice. So that would be the ultimate way to dedicate the Mishkan, which would be really, if we understand then, if Rashi, therefore, based on the rabbis before him, are understanding that Nadav and Avihu needed to die in order to dedicate the Mishkan, what kind of God is this? And what kind of system is this? Is this a system that you and I want to subscribe to? A system in which you have to die for ultimately the worship service, the sacrifice to be accepted. That's not. There are some religions out there that require that kind of dedication, and would certainly see the death of people as a gift to God. Certainly, I've been to a couple of Christian funerals where that's the case, especially funerals of young people. When young people die, and there's a Christian service, it's as if God wants this child, and that God caused the death because God felt that person was so dear to them that they were, as a gift to them and their surviving family, they understand the death as a gift to God. That to me is blasphemous. That's not the God I believe in, nor do I want to believe in. I would never teach that that's what God wants, and I would never comfort a family by saying, you should feel comforted to know that this person died at in this tragic way or at this young age because God wanted them. Right? Imagine, you all know that at the end of my first year as rabbi of Sharei Tefillah, there was the awful, horrific tragedy of the Goff family, that 4 members of the family were murdered by a worker, an assistant painter in the house. Imagine if I had said on the bima of Sharei Tefillah that you should be happy now that they are with God. That would be the worst thing to say, the absolute worst thing to say. And if I were fired for that, it would be appropriate and fitting for me to have been fired by the board of the shul for saying such a thing from the bima of Sharei Tefillah. Okay, but like I said, there are some religions that would see that, because how else can you make sense of something that is senseless? Right? Somebody dying at a young age, whether it's cancer or whether it by humans' hands or a car accident or whatever, to say that God wanted them, that's not the God I believe in. But there are very, very traditional Jews who would understand it that way, and there are other religions that understand it that way. So we were left with the medieval commentators who are traditional Jews and subscribe to this idea as well, that Nadav and Avihu were, God wanted their deaths in order to dedicate the tabernacle. So I just wanted to share that. So Abarvanel, so Rashi is from around the year 1000 or so. Abarvanel is from around the time of the expulsion of the Jews of Spain. He was among those who were expelled from Spain in 1492. And he had noted, he was a member of the court, the royal court. And so a lot of Jews and rabbis over the several hundred years in Spain served in the royal court. And he had a commentary, which is essentially lots of questions that he tries to answer about different aspects of the text. So he says this, through those near to me, that he's commenting on this, through those near to me I become holy, through those who try to draw near to me intellectually and spiritually in such a way as to be able to convey to the rest of the people the ineffable quality of my reality. When the priests whom I have chosen to draw near to me fail to do so in the proper way, they withhold from themselves and from the people the marvelous benefit I intended for them. So this is, I'm sorry, this was not a Bravanel. This is another medieval rabbi called Gersonides, Levi ben Gershon, so called Gersonides, like Maimonides, Moshe ben Maimon. So Ben, son of Maimon, becomes Maimonides. Nachmanides, Moshe ben Nachman, so son of Nachman becomes Nachmanides. And Levi ben Gershon, son of Gershon. So it's only these three who have the Onides, whose name becomes Onides. Don't know why. So, but Gersonides says that, so he takes this in the opposite way. In other words, this phrase wasn't talking about Nadav and Avihu and explaining their death, that God becomes sanctified through the death of Nadav and Avihu, but rather as a more general statement, those who fulfill their task appropriately, or those who study Torah, those who observe Jewish law to the letter and sincerely, it's those people who by whom God is sanctified. So it becomes a more general statement. When we do our best to study Judaism, to observe Judaism, and to be a model of a Jewish moral, ethical, religious model, then God becomes sanctified. So in other words, we don't become just a model to other people of how we should live and lead our lives, but rather also, not rather, but also God's presence is felt in the community. That when someone is seen as a saintly person, then someone can also see that God is embodied in that person or is brought closer to the community. So that to me is a better way to understand this challenging section. And then how do we understand Aaron being silent, right? What is he? So this quick conversation that the Torah records, not even a conversation, it's Moses saying something to Aaron. Aaron is just silent. What is he silent from? And Nachmanides says about that, and Aaron was silent. He had been weeping and moaning because his sons were just dramatically killed, but now became silent. So he's weeping, moaning, so finally becomes silent. Or perhaps, as the verse in Lamentations says, shed tears like a torrent day and night, give yourself no respite, give your eyes no rest, suggests the same verb may mean not that he became silent, but simply that he stopped crying. So not that Aaron was silent, but he just finally stopped crying. Okay, so it's a troubling section, and then below the line on 634 about Aaron was silent. The Torah usually does not call attention to someone's not speaking. What then is the unusual significance of Aaron's silence? Is it that he accepted God's decree without protest? Or that his anguish was too great for him to put into words? Or that he was tempted to burst out in anger at the unfairness of what had happened to his family, but was able to restrain himself? Perhaps the text is suggesting that there are more possibilities and more power in silence than in words. So sometimes for a funeral that I do for someone who dies under tragic circumstances, I'll use Aaron here as one example of a way to respond to tragedy. That we could respond like Jacob did, ripping his clothes and weeping uncontrollably when he heard that possibly Joseph, his beloved son, was killed by a wild animal. So that's the response. He rips his garment. Or Aaron, seeing his sons dramatically killed in this way, was silent. Or there's also David, whose son Avshalom, who Avshalom had rebelled against his father and wanted to become king himself. David had to chase after him and kind of rein him in, but in the process of chasing after him, Avshalom dies. The Bible describes him as someone with very long hair, and somehow as he's riding a horse, his hair going up and down, his hair gets stuck in a low branch, and it gets tangled up, and the horse keeps going, and Avshalom doesn't, and that quick, sudden movement kills Avshalom. And David cries out, Avshalom, Avshalom, oh my son, Avshalom. So Jacob rips his clothes, Aaron is silent, or David cries out uncontrollably. Different ways at different times, that we could respond to tragedy. So that's really what I wanted to share about Shemini today. Any thoughts or comments people want to share before we call it a day today? Yes, Paul.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that it sounds like that the leaders are being held to a higher standard.
Yes, yes. So that's something that we find in other places in the Torah, and the rabbis understand that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob knew the Torah already, and that they followed the Torah and they studied the Torah. That Moses is held to a higher standard, like I said, about hitting the rock instead of speaking to the rock. And that's the case. King David is punished, like David and Bathsheba have that affair, but that child of that intense passion dies, and the prophet Nathan talks him through that this is why that happened, because of his adultery with Bathsheba. So there are a number of examples throughout the Bible where the leader is held to a higher standard. And also, even just with the book of Esther, the leader is expected, whatever the leader does becomes a lesson to the entire community. So that's why Mordechai tries to convince Queen Esther to go into Achashverosh uninvited to tell Achashverosh about what's going on and to ask Achashverosh to save the Jews. So if she can do it, then she's doing that on behalf of the entire people of Israel. So yes, leaders have a tremendous responsibility and can bring tremendous blessing to the people. All right. Have a good rest of the day, everybody. Take care.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.